I can describe the steam locomotive pretty well by simply saying it's dead. That might sound harsh, but when was the last time you saw a brand new American steam locomotive rolling off a production line? Chances are never, because the last one was built in 1953. That's over 70 years ago. The age of steam ended not with a bang, but with a wheeze, a final puff of smoke, and the quiet hum of diesel engines taking over. I can always count on my audience to keep me up to date with these things. I have been getting quite a few requests to make a video about the American steam locomotive lately, and I completely agree. This is a story that needs to be told, a machine that could transport entire nations, haul freight across continents, and connect cities separated by thousands of miles of wilderness. The steam locomotive is easily one of the most successful machine types in American history. Here, I will prove it. In 1920, when American railroads operated over 60,000 steam locomotives, they moved 77% of all freight in the United States. Did I just blow your mind? For comparison, today's freight railroads move about 40% of the nation's freight, and they do it with roughly 25,000 locomotives total, most of them diesel-electric. Everyone, think back to the last time you saw a working steam locomotive. I'm guessing for most of you it was at a railroad museum or maybe a tourist railroad, the kind where they charge you $40 to ride behind a restored engine for 45 minutes. If you are like me, you had no idea they were in any kind of trouble back in the 1940s. Steam locomotives seemed as permanent as the rails they ran on, as essential as the coal that fired them. So what happened? How did we go from 60,000 steam locomotives to basically zero in just 20 years? Well, obviously that is what we are here to figure out today. The steam locomotive story begins in a very different America. We are talking about the early 1800s when most freight still moved by wagon or riverboat. And that is actually where the revolution started. These iron horses were literally replacing actual horses. In the beginning, people thought they were crazy, dangerous, even demonic. Sparks flying, boilers exploding, the sheer noise of it all. Imagine you are standing trackside in 1830, watching the first commercial steam locomotive in America, the best friend of Charleston. It looked nothing like the massive machines that would come later. It was a contraption that resembled a boiler on wheels with a smokestack, a few drive wheels, and a prayer. The first real breakthrough came from multiple inventors because, of course, nobody could agree on who actually invented the practical locomotive. The British had Stephenson's rocket in 1829. Americans had the Tom Thumb in 1830, built by Peter Cooper. This was not America inventing the steam locomotive outright. We were adapting, improving, making it suitable for American conditions. In the 1830s and the 1840s, American railroads were experimenting with everything. Different wheel arrangements, various boiler designs, wood fuel versus coal. Can you imagine? There were no standards, no rule books, just engineers figuring things out as they went. The transformation from crude experiment to industrial powerhouse happened between 1850 and 1900. By 1869, when the Golden Spike connected the Transcontinental Railroad at Promontory Summit, Utah, the steam locomotive had become essential to American expansion. This was not just about moving people and goods. It was about manifest destiny, about connecting an entire continent. The real turning point came after the Civil War. That is when American locomotive builders started thinking big, really big. The 1880s through the 1940s became the golden age. And if you want to understand why steam locomotives became such a dominant force, you have to understand what was happening in America during this period. We are talking about industrial expansion, westward settlement, 2 world wars, and of course the massive demand for coal and steel. Suddenly, America needed machines that could handle bigger loads, longer distances, and more challenging terrain. The locomotive builders delivered. Machines grew from modest 440 Americans weighing 25 tons to massive articulated monsters like the Union Pacific Big Boy weighing over 600 tons. The early 1900s through the 1940s were when things really peaked. Steam locomotives evolved dramatically from producing less than 500 horsepower in 1850 to machines producing over 6,000 horsepower by the 1940s. Think about that. In less than a century, locomotive power increased more than 12-fold. And in 1944, something remarkable happened. American railroads operated over 40,000 steam locomotives at their peak during World War II. Not diesel, not electric, steam. These iron giants were moving war materials, troops, coal, grain, everything that kept America running. What made them so special during this era? For starters, they were absolutely enormous. We are talking about land ships here. These were not just locomotives, they were mobile power plants. Take the 1941 Union Pacific Big Boy, for example. This thing was over 132 feet long. That is longer than a blue whale. For comparison, a modern diesel-electric locomotive is only about 70 feet long. Yes, your efficient modern diesel is almost half the size of what steam could achieve, but it was not just about size. These locomotives represented something bigger. They were symbols of American industrial might. The steam locomotive was going to deliver it all. The first truly powerful machine that could move entire trainloads of goods across a continent. The variety was absolutely mind-blowing. Remember when I said there were over 60,000 steam locomotives in 1920? Let me break down what that actually meant. You had switchers for yard work, light Pacifics for passenger service, heavy Mountains for freight, massive articulateds for helper service. Some had 2 sets of driving wheels. Some had 3, some had 4. The wheel arrangements alone were an engineering marvel. You had wheel arrangements like 440, 280, 462, 2664, and 4884. Each number told you exactly how the locomotive was configured. The first number was leading wheels, the middle was drivers, the last was trailing wheels. The engineering innovations of this era brought even more advancement. This was when we saw superheaters, feed water heaters, mechanical stokers, roller bearings. Advanced engineering was not a new idea. Baldwin, Lima, and Alco were putting sophisticated technology into steam locomotives back in the 1920s. You had compound locomotives with high and low pressure cylinders. You had experimental designs like the Pennsylvania Railroad S1 duplex with its 6446 wheel arrangement that looked like something from another planet. Let me tell you about the cultural impact these machines had. From the 1920s to the 1940s, if you were an American railroad, you operated steam locomotives. It was just what you did. These were not just machines, they were mobile cathedrals of industry. Towns lived and died by the railroad. Kids grew up watching steam locomotives thunder past, feeling the ground shake, smelling coal smoke, and hearing that haunting whistle. Engineers were respected craftsmen who could coax maximum performance from their iron horses. Firemen shoveled tons of coal per trip, building muscles that would make a bodybuilder jealous. And the marketing, oh man, the marketing was something else. Railroads gave their premier locomotives names. The Pennsylvania Railroad ran the Broadway Limited behind K4's Pacifics. The New York Central ran the 20th Century Limited behind streamlined Hudsons. The Santa Fe ran the Super Chief with its elegant passenger locomotives. Every railroad had a flagship train, its pride and joy. The performance was impressive too. These locomotives were not just about hauling freight slowly. By the 1930s and 40s, you could get a streamlined steam locomotive that would absolutely fly. We are talking speeds over 100 miles per hour. The Milwaukee Road Class A Hudsons regularly hit 120 miles per hour. The Pennsylvania Railroad T1 duplex could allegedly reach 140 miles per hour, though no one could prove it because the speedometers only went to 120. Sure, they burned tons of coal per hour, but coal was cheap. America had mountains of it, and we felt on top of the world. What could possibly go wrong? All right, now I need to talk about the economics, and I know some of you are thinking, oh no, not financial talk, but stick with me here because this is where the story gets really interesting. See, on the surface, the steam locomotive business looked fantastic through the early 1940s, but there were warning signs if you knew where to look. When you are running a railroad, you want to keep your costs low and your efficiency high. Pretty simple, right? Well, the problem with steam locomotives was that they were expensive to operate. You had all the fuel costs, plus you needed water stops every 100 miles, coal towers, ash pits, roundhouses, turntables. Steam locomotives were thermally efficient at maybe 6 to 8%. For every 100 units of energy and coal, only 6 to 8 made it to the rails. The rest went up the smokestack or heated the surrounding air. As long as coal was cheap and labor was plentiful, everything was fine. Then the late 1940s happened. If you were not alive then, it's hard to explain just how fast things changed. Diesel-electric locomotives had been around since the 1920s, but they were mostly switchers and passenger units. Nobody thought they could handle heavy freight. The war had delayed their development. But after 1945, everything changed. Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out there is a new type of locomotive that uses half the fuel, needs a fraction of the maintenance, can run for days without servicing, and 3 of them can replace 5 steam locomotives. That is what railroads faced. General Motors' Electromotive division started pumping out FT and F3 freight diesels by the thousands. They offered railroads a deal that was impossible to refuse. Buy our diesels, we will finance them, and your operating costs will plummet. Diesel-electric units were getting 25 to 30% efficiency. When fuel costs started rising and labor got more expensive, suddenly that gorgeous steam locomotive in your roundhouse looked less like industrial art and more like an anchor around your neck. The numbers tell the story, after peaking at over 40,000. In 1944, steam locomotive rosters started sliding. By 1950, they had dropped below 30,000. The decline was precipitous. By 1955, only about 15,000 remained. By 1960, fewer than 3,000 were still in service. Norfolk and Western hung on the longest operating steam until 1960. Think about that. In 15 years, an entire technology that had dominated for over a century was essentially extinct. But wait, it gets worse. Not only were steam locomotives expensive to run, they were expensive to maintain. Boilers needed constant inspection and repair. Fireboxes wore out. Flues leaked. Side rods needed adjustment. Every 30 days, a steam locomotive needed a thorough inspection. Every year or two, it needed major work. The maintenance infrastructure was staggering. Huge roundhouses with dozens of stalls. Machine shops that could rebuild entire locomotives. Armies of skilled craftsmen who knew how to work on these complex machines. All of that became obsolete almost overnight. The real killer was not just economics. It was the complete package that diesel-electric offered. Diesels could be operated in multiple unit consists with one crew controlling 3 or 4 locomotives. Try that with steam. Diesels could run through, meaning one locomotive could go from Chicago to Los Angeles without changing. Steam needed crew changes, fuel stops, water stops, ash cleaning. Diesels started instantly. Steam needed hours to build up steam pressure. Diesels could be serviced in minutes. Steam needed hours. It was like comparing a smartphone to a rotary phone. But there was another factor that nobody really talks about: image. By the 1950s, steam locomotives had become associated with the old ways, with inefficiency, with smoke and dirt and labor-intensive operations. That image mattered to executives, to customers, and to the public, and it helped speed the final curtain on steam. They were seen as romantic, sure, but romantic in the way that oil lamps and horse-drawn carriages are romantic. Nice to look at, terrible for actual work. If you were a railroad executive trying to convince investors and regulators that you were a modern, efficient operation, the last thing you wanted was smoke-belching steam locomotives. You wanted sleek diesels with their clean lines and promise of efficiency. The knockout punch came from simple arithmetic. By the mid-1950s, railroads had figured out the math. A diesel-electric cost about twice as much to purchase as a comparable steam locomotive, but it cost 1/3 as much to operate and maintain. Over a 20-year lifespan, the diesel would save hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions depending on the service. When accountants ran those numbers, steam's fate was sealed. By the late 1950s, the writing was not just on the wall, it was in neon lights, flashing obsolete. Let me give you some perspective on how complete the collapse was. In 1950, American railroads still operated about 30,000 steam locomotives. By 1960, that number had dropped to under 1,000. That is a 97% decline in 1 decade. The last major steam locomotive built in the United States was Norfolk and Western's 2300 Class 484, completed in 1953. After that, nothing. Baldwin Locomotive Works, once the world's largest locomotive builder, struggled to compete in the diesel market and eventually gave up on locomotives entirely by 1956. The final years were particularly sad to watch. Magnificent locomotives that had hauled trains for decades were unceremoniously scrapped. Entire fleets were cut up for their metal. Steam locomotives that could have run for years more were declared surplus and sent to the torch. Some railroads literally had scrap lines stretching for miles. Locomotives that had cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to build were scrapped for a few $1,000s in scrap value. What really sealed steam's fate was a perfect storm of factors. Environmental concerns were mounting. Steam locomotives produced prodigious amounts of smoke and ash. Cities were getting tired of coal smoke blanketing their streets. Labor costs were rising. The unions representing firemen fought hard to keep jobs, but ultimately even they could not stop technological progress. Coal's dominance was ending. Diesel fuel was cleaner, easier to transport, and increasingly competitive on price. But here is the surprising part. Steam locomotives were actually still improving right up to the end. The last steam designs from the late 1940s and early 1950s were remarkably efficient and powerful. Norfolk and Western's J-Class 484 locomotives could match early diesels in many performance metrics, but it did not matter. The infrastructure needed to support steam was crumbling, and no railroad wanted to invest in it when diesels were the obvious future. So, where are we today? Well, believe it or not, the steam locomotive is not completely dead in America. It is more like it is in a coma, being kept alive by enthusiasts and tourist railroads. Heritage operations such as Strasburg Railroad, Cumbres and Toltec, and the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad continue to offer steam locomotive experiences. Steam still feels magical to many tourists. The numbers are pretty depressing. In 2020, there were maybe 150 to 200 operational steam locomotives in North America. That means operational, capable of running. Most are small, built for tourist service. Union Pacific maintains their 844 and occasionally runs their big boy 4014. Those are the exceptions. But here is what is really interesting and kind of ironic. Remember how I said diesels killed steam? Well, now we have diesel-electric locomotives that are basically more advanced versions of what replaced steam. The General Electric ES44AC that you see hauling freight today is a direct descendant of the EMDF units that helped end steam. There have been a few attempts at steam revivals. Coal-fired steam turbine electric locomotives were proposed in the 1980s when oil prices spiked. They never materialized because oil prices dropped and diesel remained cheaper. What would it take for steam to make a real comeback? Honestly, I think that ship has sailed, been scrapped, and the metal has been recycled into rebar. The infrastructure of American railroading has been built entirely around diesel-electric power for 70 years. The only way I see steam coming back is if diesel fuel becomes prohibitively expensive and stays there, or if there is some massive technological breakthrough. But even then, we would probably go electric or hydrogen before we went back to steam. You know, researching this video made me realize something. I never actually got to experience the golden age of steam. By the time I was born, it was already history. But I do remember seeing preserved locomotives in museums and maybe catching one of the excursion runs of Union Pacific 3985 or 844. Every time I see one, it feels like encountering a dinosaur. What made steam locomotives special was not efficiency, that was terrible, or cleanliness, laughably bad, or even the economics, absolutely brutal by the end. It was what they represented. They were the ultimate symbol of the industrial age. From what I have learned making this video, the steam locomotive was where history happened, where crews learned their craft over decades of service, where entire communities gathered to watch the limiteds thunder through its speed, where America proved it could connect a continent through sheer engineering will. No computers, no electronics, just fire, water, and precisely machined steel turning coal into motion. Part of me is amazed that any still exist in working order. These machines were built when tolerances were measured in thousandths of an inch using hand tools. Who else would build a machine with thousands of moving parts, running on live steam at hundreds of pounds per square inch, trusting it to haul millions of dollars worth of freight at 60 miles per hour? Only us. But here is what we lost when steam died. Romance, yes, I know your diesel is efficient, but can it make your chest vibrate when it passes? Can you smell its exhaust and feel the heat from its firebox? Can you watch it work, See every piston stroke and drive wheel revolution? A proper steam locomotive engaged all your senses in a way no diesel ever will. We also lost craftsmanship. Every steam locomotive required skilled crews who understood thermodynamics and mechanical engineering and who could diagnose problems by sound and feel. Diesel locomotives require technicians with computers. The death of the steam locomotive teaches us something important about American industrial culture. We do not always adopt what is most romantic or nostalgic. We adopt what makes the most economic sense. Diesel electrics made people money and saved railroads from bankruptcy, even if they did not stir the soul. It also shows how quickly things can change. In one generation, steam went from absolute dominance to complete extinction. The same thing could happen to diesel electric if the right combination of factors comes along. So I have to ask, do you remember seeing a steam locomotive when you were younger? What railroad was it? Did your grandfather work on the railroad during the steam era? What do you think really killed steam? Do you agree with my theory that it was a combination of economics, efficiency, and changing times? And here's a question I really want you to think about. Do you miss having real steam locomotives as an option? Or do you think diesel-electric locomotives are just better? For you railroad enthusiasts out there, what is your favorite American steam locomotive of all time? I would like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.